3 studies, all published this year, have independently confirmed the best diet for human health, and we'll go through each study step by step. Now, before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that diet is a very personal decision. For example, some people swear by the carnivore diet, others the vegan diet. What matters though is that you follow a diet that works for you, that makes you feel energized, protects your heart, maximizes your muscle strength, and maintains a healthy weight. I'm not here to convince you of anything, I'm just reporting on these 3 studies so that you've got more information to make your own health choices. The first study was published in the Journal of Medicine, so a very high-ranking journal, and as we go through the study, I want you to be skeptical. Why should we believe this trial? It compared low-carbohydrate diets to low-fat diets, and it's a prospective cohort study. It starts by acknowledging that there's conflicting information, where some randomized controlled trials suggest more cardiovascular benefits from a low-carbohydrate diet than a low-fat diet, but yet a recent meta-analysis concluded that there's potentially undesirable effects from a low-carbohydrate diet with respect to total and all-cause death rates. However, the long-term effects of the low-carbohydrate diet compared to the low-fat diet on age-related health outcomes remains less studied. Which brings us to this trial, which aims to identify the associations between each dietary pattern with total and all-cause death rates. It enrolled people between the age of 50 to 71 years old in the United States, and it involved a total of over 371,000 participants. And all participants completed a food questionnaire each year, so this is an observational study. It's not a randomized controlled trial. It's simply observing these participants to see if their diet choices affect their overall lifespan. And it followed these participants up for 23 years. So the strengths of this study is that it's a massive study involving a lot of participants and over a significant time frame. And when we have a look at the results, we can see that those participants that followed the low carbohydrate diet, they seem to have increased rates of death. And the more rigorously that people stuck to the low carbohydrate diet, the higher their death rates, and we can see a clear trend. So please don't shoot the messenger, I'm simply reporting on these findings. If we compare that to the low-fat diet, we can see a clear trend of decreasing death rates. So the more that the participants stuck to a low-fat diet, we can see that they had lower overall death rates. The same findings were found for heart disease, where participants that stuck to the low-carbohydrate diet, they had increased rates of cardiovascular death. In contrast, those that ate a low-fat diet, they had lower rates of total cardiovascular death. The same was found for cancer, where the low-carbohydrate diets had increased rates of cancer deaths, whereas the low-fat diet had lower rates of cancer deaths. If we move to the discussion where they did further analysis, they say that when they replaced low-quality carbohydrates and saturated fats with plant-based proteins, that was associated with an even lower chance of death rates. These results suggest that a healthy, low-fat diet with minimal saturated fat intake would be an effective dietary strategy for healthy aging middle-aged and older people. What I take away from this large observational study is that it provides more proof that we want to lower low-quality carbohydrate intake. We want to cut out sugary foods and processed grains such as white bread. We also want to reduce saturated fat intake, and these findings are in line with a previous Cochrane review. On the point of protein, a physiological hallmark during aging is a decline in skeletal muscle mass and function, known as sarcopenia, which may increase morbidity and death rates and the risks of age-related chronic disease. Therefore, adequate protein intake is recommended for middle-aged and older people to counteract sarcopenia, and that's why in the clinic I often suggest to my patients that they need to significantly increase their protein intake. And in this observational study, they observed more evident reverse associations with death rates when people replaced low-quality carbohydrates and saturated fats with plant protein rather than animal protein. The discussion goes on to emphasize that we need to move away from a typical Western diet or move away from the standard American diet. The overall takeaway is that we want to substitute low-quality carbohydrates and saturated fats and replace them with high-quality protein. The strengths of the study is that it was massive. It involved over 370,000 participants, and it was over a long time frame, so 23 years. We can also see clear trends, but the weaknesses of the study is that it's an observational trial, so we can't fully adjust for all of the other confounding factors. Which brings us to the second study that was published in the British Medical Journal. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis, so a much higher level of evidence compared to that first observational trial. It starts by acknowledging that although dietary guidelines have suggested that a number of dietary programs might reduce the risk of major cardiovascular events, they have typically relied on surrogate outcomes, or low to very low certainty evidence from non-randomized study designs. And to date, there's a lack of meta-analyses that have systematically summarized the randomized controlled trials to compare the impact of structured dietary programs on death rates and major cardiovascular events. So this meta-analysis only included randomized controlled trials of adults at an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Eligible studies had to have gone for at least 9 months. But one of the weaknesses of this study is that they couldn't do a macronutrient composition analysis because there weren't enough studies that looked at low carbohydrate diets. So a quick tangent to address the carnivore and keto influences. You've made a lot of money selling courses and dietary supplements. Please use some of that money to fund a large randomized controlled study looking at your particular diet and comparing it to, say, for example, a Mediterranean diet, looking over a 5-year period to see what the effect of people following your diet has on cardiovascular disease. Coming back to the analysis, it found 40 eligible trials involving over 35,000 participants. The average follow-up was 3 years, and on assessing the quality of these trials, they judged 13 to be low risk of bias and 27 to be at high risk of bias. And when we have a look at the summary, we can see that the Mediterranean diet and the low-fat diets were the clear winners in terms of reducing all-cause death rates. The analysis goes on to say that these results established with moderate certainty evidence an absolute risk reduction in mortality rates that is attributable to the Mediterranean diet and the low-fat dietary programs. Overall then, this meta-analysis has similar themes to the previous observational study that we went through, where we want to try and reduce low-quality carbohydrates and reduce saturated fats and replace them with protein. The final study that we'll go through is a narrative review, and then I'll share the diet that I personally follow. The review discusses the Mediterranean diet and how it limits or eliminates many of the culprits in the standard American diet that drive cardiovascular disease, specifically that we want to try and reduce saturated fats and highly processed refined grains and sugars. The review then shifts its focus to the keto and other very low carbohydrate diets, and it says that these diets they have been promoted for their effects on weight loss, improvement in insulin resistance, and blood sugar level control. However, this diet can also promote increases in LDL cholesterol, particularly in a subset of individuals who are hyper-responsive. This has limited the enthusiasm of many medical professional societies from endorsing its use. Evidence of this comes from a recent meta-analysis that found that the ketogenic diet it conferred unfavorable effects to LDL cholesterol and ApoB. These potential deleterious effects on lipids needs to be considered carefully before initiating a ketogenic diet. However, theoretically, a plant-based ketogenic diet that is low in saturated fats may limit some of these adverse consequences, but there are no trials examining this yet, and again, I'm reiterating my call here to the keto and carnivore communities. We need you to fund these trials. The narrative review concludes that the Mediterranean diet remains one of the most effective and recommended balanced diets for cardiovascular health promotion. In summary, all 3 of these studies suggest reducing low-quality carbohydrates and saturated fats and replace those with high-quality proteins. At the end of the day though, it's your health, your decision. Diets are incredibly personal. I wanted to report on these studies so that you've got more information when you're making your own health decisions. I am not here to convince you of anything. Whatever you decide to do with your own health is your decision. Personally, I follow a Mediterranean diet. That's the diet that works for me, but I want to hear from you in the comments what diet works for you. Now the next question to ask is, where does intermittent fasting fit into all of this? So make sure to check out this next video here that goes through all of the latest research. A massive thank you to DoNotAge.org for their $10,000 donation to my rapamycin study. They are a health research organization, and to benefit from their ingredients as well as the 10% discount code, check out the pinned comment.